And let's talk a little bit about what's going on between these two teams, the 49ers and the Chiefs. And, Chris, something came up yesterday that you and I have discussed from time to time.
Yeah.
Because it was back in 2017 when people were deciding what they were doing at the top of the draft. There were some teams that had some picks in the top 5, and one of the teams wanted a quarterback, and that team traded up a spot. I can't remember what team it was, but that team traded up to get Mitch Trubisky. And the other team wasn't interested in one of the other great quarterbacks who's in this game, Patrick Mahomes. The 49ers, when they dropped from 2 to number 3, they went with the defensive lineman, and your guy Kyle Shanahan wasn't interested in bringing in Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
He addressed yesterday. We're going to hear from Kyle Shanahan. He addressed how much he looked into the possibility of drafting Patrick Mahomes with that third pick in the 2017 draft. Here's Shanahan from Tuesday.
I didn't look into him, obviously, as much as I should have. I think it was, we definitely looked into him, studied all his tape, was just a freak. Could make any throw, had the ability to do anything. I thought it was a little bit different situation for us. We had the second pick in the draft. Did not feel like, from all the intel you get and stuff, that he was going to go that high. And it was a little different situation for us just because I think it's pretty well documented of just the relationship I had with Kirk and being in Washington and everything. And I felt very confident that he wasn't going to stay there. So anytime you go into a season knowing that a franchise quarterback's going to be available the next year, it made me a lot more picky with what we were looking at.
Kyle Shanahan referring to Kirk Cousins, who was entering his last year with Washington, became the free agent. Of course, along the way, they traded for Jimmy Garoppolo. But, he said something that caught my eye.
Yeah.
Their intelligence suggested to them that Patrick Mahomes wasn't going to be taken high.
Right.
Further proof that guys like Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Mike McCarthy kept their mouths shut and nobody else knew how much they regarded Patrick Mahomes. Because if they had caught wind of that, if Shanahan had heard that Andy Reid loves this guy, don't you think
or Sean Payton had him as the number 1 player on the board.
Look at him a little more carefully and maybe have an epiphany that this is the guy we have to have.
I will say this, and I'm patting myself on the. I tried to give him that epiphany to a degree. I did. I know I've talked to you about this because, Shanahan, he liked Mahomes. He definitely did. I remember we had a conversation like 2 weeks before the draft. He was asking me about a few guys in the draft, and he said, "Yeah, man, I don't know if I want to really take a defensive lineman with the number 2 pick and do that." And I said to him, I said, did you look at Mahomes? Because I was in love with Mahomes. I was, just blabbering about him all the time. Oh man, yeah, you think he's that good? The second pick, and ultimately what happened is he had his sights set on Kirk Cousins. He knew there was a guy that was going to be available, and I really think he thought, I'm going to get him when this first season's over. He knows my system, and then in year 2 of my career here in San Francisco, we can kind of just hit the ground running. And I think he just was planning on that happening all along, but of course things changed.
All right, so a couple things here.
Yeah.
One, I want credit for what Kyle Shanahan just said, because Mike, on this very show last week, did I not say we need to start talking about all the teams that passed on Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, a lot of people get a free pass.
Not just the
Chicago.
Bears. I said what happened with the Niners, because Patrick Mahomes is such a great talent that you can put aside need. If you had a quarterback, it doesn't matter. Patrick Mahomes was better, right? Some of those teams at the top of the draft had quarterbacks, but guess what? Patrick Mahomes is better. The other thing that's interesting from this, and that was the first time I saw it, the Bears, and I don't want to make this about the Bears, but it's so clear that if the Bears had moved on from John Fox, maybe when they should have after 2 years, instead of having that lame duck coach come back for a third year, they might have had a different mind in the building who said, hey, let's look at someone else. Because if you remember, Ryan Pace didn't tell John Fox that they were picking
he had no
Mitch
idea.
Trubisky.
Right.
And you see this clip where Kyle Shanahan didn't know about, Sean Payton and Andy Reid and all these other teams so high on Patrick Mahomes. So it was clear if you maybe got a different mind in the building, they would have also been high on Patrick Mahomes. History is different. Now I'm upset.
Yeah, there was a small group of coaches who loved Patrick Mahomes, and they kept their mouths shut.
If you bring Matt Nagy in a year earlier, which he might not have been ready for the job, but he obviously knew about Patrick Mahomes. That's that story that was in the Chicago Tribune a couple months ago, where it was clear that the Chiefs had been targeting Patrick Mahomes for a year plus, and they were enamored with him. That building knew. Yeah. Other buildings just didn't figure it out, and it just shows it's fascinating to look at how these games can be won in the middle of October, not on the field, but a guy scouting something,
department, right?
Or maybe it's February when they're going through the draft. All these things matter, and that's why we're here.
And credit to Andy Reid, the master stroke was recognizing that Sean Payton, the Saints coach, felt the same way about Mahomes that Reid did, because Reid moved all the way up to number 10, cut the line one spot in front of the Saints to get Mahomes when the Saints were ready to draft Mahomes. Drew Brees was in the draft room, and they had to go tell Drew, hey, we may be taking a quarterback here. You just got to be ready for it. He's there with guests. Yeah. And it's like, this could be an ugly scene when we read off this name and it's quarterback. Right. But that's how close it was for the Saints to take.
Remember Mike Glennon? Mike Glennon went down to like the Fan Fest at Soldier Field, and then they picked Mitch Trubisky. So these happen in organizations where, you know, it can happen like that, and a guy can be moved on from, you know, in a blink of an eye.
One thing we got to say, too, I mean, hey, Andy Reid, we know he's the magic man with quarterbacks. He's got an incredible eye, but really the architect of it is Brett Veach, the GM in Kansas City. He was the guy that thrusted Mahomes onto Reid's radar, you know, and I don't know. I know I've talked to Brett Veach about it. We have together. I've read articles about it, but I know he gave him reports and, hey, this guy is one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen or evaluated. And I know Andy, you know, at first was probably a little skeptical about a comment like that, but I think when he turned on the film, you know, it was for me, it was easy to see. I think a lot of people got fooled by the T on the helmet and that it was Texas Tech.
The conference,
the
too.
conference
the Big 12
as well.
Conference has
he
never
throws it every play. Does he really know how to play the position? Are the stats real? All of those things, I think. And, of course, nobody's ever really come out of Texas Tech and been successful. So I think all those things hurt Mahomes and people's eyes who couldn't just take it for what it was worth, that guy was awesome. Forget the conference and everything else. It's just about that guy, and that's where he's special.
I think there's another untold story as it relates to how the Chiefs discovered Patrick Mahomes, because Brett Veach wasn't the GM at the time.
Right.
John Dorsey was.
Yeah.
And John Dorsey got fired not long after Mahomes was drafted. And I'd love to know what Dorsey was saying about Mahomes. Because if he wasn't all in on Mahomes and Veach was, and Veach sold Andy Reid on it, that becomes a huge data point in deciding who the GM should be going forward. Because Veach got it right, clearly. And if Dorsey wasn't on board with what Veach was saying, Dorsey got it wrong.
Yeah. All this stuff is fascinating. By the way, nice ricochet shot at Wes Welker there, saying no one has ever come out of Texas Tech. But that's
I meant at quarterback position. Yeah.
No, but it's true. You know, I know myself. Like, I'm not an expert. I don't watch the film like you. I'm not an insider like Mike Florio. I saw Big 12 and I was like, no chance.
Yeah, you're like, right. I know.
You know, they're down $1 million every game. They don't play defense. Every single game is video game scores. Of course, he's going to throw for 7 touchdowns against, you know, Baylor and all this stuff. And that is how we were all wired. Now you see, obviously, Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and the Big 12.
You start to realize the reps actually are good.
Well,
the fact that you get to do that a little bit, too. As long as the guy has talent and it's not fake talent, you're just looking at the stat line at the end of the day.
And the way the game has changed, how the pro game now mirrors the college game a lot more than it did 15 years ago, where 15 years ago, if you got a guy like this who's playing in this offense, and then he goes and plays in the NFL, and everyone says, well, we want him under center, and we want him to, you know, play a different style, and there's no different RPOs. Everything that's going on now in the pro game is a lot closer to the college game, so the transition, I mean, remember that? Like, you know, guys would come out of the Big 12, you're like, they could never make it.
To speak to your point, I mean, I was at the Senior Bowl with Cliff
Were you
Kingsbury.
In the Big 12?
I was.
Oh, my bad.
But we were a real conference then. We played defense. But
as evidenced by his performance. The defenses were much better because of him.
Well, no, I mean, you know, we were back in those days. I mean, you think Oklahoma and Bob Stoops and Colorado and Nebraska. Right. Let's actually figure that out. But you're right. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury in our Senior Bowl had a really hard time taking center snaps. I mean, it was like it was a new thing to him where he was like, what? And, you know, he had issues with it. He, of course, got a hold of it. But I do think there was that stigma to Big Cat.
It was always the pro-style offense. You saw teams, you're like, well, that's not a pro-style offense. We can't draft that guy. And now it's completely different. And you look at guys in all different conferences, all different offenses, and you're like, you know what? We can change our offense.
Exactly. Let's actually fit him.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.